Toji is overrated and underrated. In this video, I'll be saying why he's overrated and both underrated, and we'll start off with overrated. So Toji is overrated, and we'll first start off with his first fight against Gojo. The first things you need to know is the circumstances before the fight had begun. Firstly, Toji is an assassin, so his profile and how he operates is to get the jump on the opposition he's fighting. Secondly, he has heavenly restrictions, so he has no curse energy, which allowed him to not be sensed by the barriers in Jujutsu High, as well as being sensed by the other people such as Gojo and Geto. Thirdly, he took 3 days to prep. He took 3 days to prep to make sure he got the right equipment. He himself said if it was a fair fight, he doesn't think he would be able to win. Moreover, Gojo was fatigued from using his Limitless and 6 Eyes constantly for 3 days, and he was 17 years old. He wasn't the pinnacle in terms of what we know Gojo is in terms of his strength now. He didn't have access to reverse curse technique, didn't have access to reversal red or hollow purple, neither did he have a domain expansion. Even still, I will not take away too much from Toji because that's the nature of the world he lives in. If someone is coming to assassinate you, you can't use so many factors against them. However, I want people to use it with a grain of salt when they use that to boost Toji. So this is my biggest misconception. Won that fight and completely outmaneuvered Gojo. There is still some nuances to the fact that he did things which were in his best interest to give him the best odds to win the battle. So once he did win the battle and then got the jump on Geto, there's also the fact that Geto was not ready to see Toji. However, I won't be using this as a way to descale Toji because Toji completely slapped up Geto in this regard. However, one thing that could be seen as a potential buff for Geto in that regard is when he tries to exercise the curse behind Toji. Unfortunately, Geto was not aware that he could not exercise said curse, and that is what got him in the biggest trouble and ended up getting completely slapped by the end. By him going through that and then Toji saying this was your biggest mistake, that ended up with the conclusion of the fight. And even though regardless of that I still think Toji could have won, I think it gives us an indication to why Geto was dealt with so easily. Now we go to the second thing which people overrate him, and it's the fight against Dagon. So I will tell you now, if the fight was a 1v1, there is a 50-50 chance Toji wins. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be upset from this, but we have to talk about the nuances with what happened in that fight. Firstly, Nobito is an individual who used a domain counter and his body was still ripped to shreds and nearly died, even with Dagon splitting up the effect of his domain into 2 halves. You saw how he used 70% on one half and 30% in the other. If this is a simple 1v1 fight where he's sending all of them at one person, how would Toji be able to stop that? Because one, he has no domain counters like even the Fallen Blossom. He doesn't have a domain expansion himself, so the sure hit effect will affect him. Reason why he wasn't affected by the sure hit from before was because Megumi's introduction with his domain expansion. With him activating his domain expansion, it caused a tug of war which negated the guaranteed hit, which was evident through Dagon's dialogue. So because of this, and since like I said, Toji won't have a domain expansion, he won't be able to negate that short hit, meaning the endless stream of the Shinigami will continue to overpower him. Be people who are going to say that, well, he dodges the barriers, so why can't he dodge a domain expansion barrier? Unless the story continues to show us that there is a different way. At this moment of time, regular barriers and domain expansion barriers are not the same. Domain expansion barriers imbue the individual's curse energy and innate technique properties compared to a curtain which would just try to imbue somebody and keep them in a certain spot. It doesn't do the same properties even though you use some of it for what you could say creating your own domain expansion. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions of what people are talking about. Unless the story comes to tell us otherwise, there is nothing to indicate that he can beat somebody with a domain expansion for the most part. However, there is one thing which I'll give him a little credit, and that is obviously the inverted Spear of Heaven, which in my opinion he's far stronger than Dagon in base form and completely overpower him. However, if Dagon just uses a domain straight away, I don't know if necessarily he can deal with 100 endless Shinigami coming at him. And there are people trying to say that he can fight Jogo. I mean, no way. There is no way he can defeat Jogo. Even Nobito himself said Jogo was on a completely different level to Dagon and Hanami. So if we're going to assume that a lot of people like to put him on the scale of Gojo and Sukuna, that is impossible. There is nothing to indicate that. Moreover, the fact that Megumi said Toji's speed is relative to Sukuna. Now let's talk about the Sukuna that he knows. The Sukuna he's talking about is 3 Finger Sukuna. So if Jogo, who even if we're saying Kenjaku highballed him, said he was 9 or 8 fingers, that is still 5 or 6 different fingers difference between what we can assume is the speed of Toji. Moreover, the data book said, and even though I disagree with this because to an extent, it said Toji without curse tools is relative to Nobito. So even though I don't agree with this argument because you can't just strip away somebody their main arsenal, but if we're saying his base form is just the same level of Nobito, then how are people scaling him to the level of Jogo and other disaster curses? To get disaster curses for a lot of people who have domain expansions is going to be very difficult for the likes of Toji and Maki to win. And then this is going to be my final thing with why Toji is overrated. When people like to overscale Toji, they like to downplay Maki at the same time. When the story has made a comparison saying they are exact same physically. I'm not saying they're as strong as each other, but physical strength, so that means speed, durability, etc. have been shaped by the story to be the exact same. So people who like to boost Toji and shit on Maki at the same time, you guys are contradicting yourself and it doesn't make any sense. Now this is where I will go and say that Toji is underrated. Even though Maki and Toji have been compared to be the same, I don't agree that Toji and Maki are the same strength for 3 reasons. 1. Toji has better intelligence, he's an assassin and had better training with using his heavenly restriction body, and he has better curse tools. All 3 of these are big reasons why he's such an elite assassin and he could end up killing somebody like Gojo. Even though we can say that Gojo was fatigued and etc, Gojo is still a dangerous Gojo, but there is still worlds apart pre-Gojo and after Gojo. However, the nature of Jujutsu High doesn't wait for people to have restrictions. The good thing with Toji is he uses his body and his advantages to its fullest. He knows he doesn't have the curse energy, so he sneaks up on people. In the fight against Dagon, he got to a point where he was exhausted and then completely outmaneuvered him with his hand-to-hand combat. Moreover, with the sure hit effect being taken away by Megumi, it showcased how his intelligence and battle intelligence is just ahead people such as Maki at this moment of time. Another thing to boost Toji is the fact that he's an anomaly. Even though I say at this moment of time they have no domain counters, if later in the story Gege was to say that heavenly restriction can counter a domain expansion, then it would completely change the game and it would put them in a different tier in my opinion, especially with how good their physical stats are. They work well, especially with teaming up with people or in assassin type situations. And this is why Toji was so effective, because he used what he knew with his body to the best ability. And I think this is a good thing to scale why with Toji, when people want to say, oh, with certain prep time he can defeat someone, that is facts. He reminds me similar to that of obviously Batman. With prep time, there's a lot of people who can beat, and with the diversity of what curse tools can do, we can indicate that they can do things that can mitigate the factors of him being weaker than other people. And this moves on to my next point. Not always the stronger person wins in JJK. We've been reading this series and in multiple occasions, for example, Mahito and Yuji. Yuji is obviously weaker than Mahito. However, due to him being a hard counter, he's managed to be able to get the jump on Mahito. Similarly, Toji is a bad matchup for majority of everybody because he has no curse energy. For the most part, if it's not a 1v1, he can take advantage of the situation and sneak up on people and end up killing them with 1 to 2 blows because he needs to maximize his attacks. I think with the fact that even though I agree that in my opinion in total that Toji is overrated, I do think there's a lot of people who don't put enough respect in him, especially with those who think that he loses to a lot of grade 1 sorcerers. Physically, he's on a tier above the majority of Jujutsu sorcerers that we've seen, and his close combat is elite. The thing that makes it difficult for him is the fact that he obviously has no curse techniques and he has no domain expansion counters. I think these two, and obviously unless the story begins to change that, there's different things that Toji and Maki can do, then I think that is the only way we can see that change. However, at this moment of time, and I'm firm in my opinion, I believe Toji is slightly overrated. He's one of my favorite characters and he's shown a lot of great moments. However, people who try to put him on the Gojo Sukuna level, you guys are drunk. And people who think he can beat disaster curses such as Mahito and Jogo, you guys are drunk as well. Unless the story tells us that he can have a domain counter and his heavenly restriction body stops him from getting affected by domain expansions, which at this moment of time I disagree, then there's no way he can defeat those high level disaster curses, and I only give him edge against Dagon and Hanami because he's just so far ahead in base stats. Even though Megumi said that he's relative to Three Finger Sukuna, I think he didn't mean to say he's directly comparable, but he was saying that his speed reminds him of someone of that elite level. Especially with the fact that he hadn't seen too many people, with obviously Gojo being able to just teleport and then Nobito, I think it was highlighting how fast he was, and we can even infer potentially Finger Sukuna be faster than even Nobito. Another thing that could boost and potentially show that maybe Three Finger Sukuna is just far stronger than we can indicate is the fact that he himself said fight against Muhuraga. He said himself that if Megumi had summoned Muhuraga then, he may have been in trouble. So him saying may could be another way to potentially boost him. However, at this moment of time, I don't think that is necessarily the best thing to use, and I'm just going to say it was just to scale him to give him an indication of how strong Toji was. Moreover, we can even infer that potentially, and this is just headcanon, the body that he got from Granny Ogani wasn't in the way in which he could maximize his body to the fullest potential, and I think the Megumi versus Toji fight isn't a good indication. People try to say Megumi was getting close to him. Well, Toji was obviously holding back and wanted to get to that conversation with Megumi in which we get to that final conclusion. Thank you guys for watching. Do you think Toji is overrated or underrated? At the end of the day, let me know your opinions and make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe.